Fairy tales were supposed to help children sleep, but there's one that was designed to keep adults awake. You know the story of Bluebeard, the charming tale where a rich man tells his wife, "Sweetheart, whatever you do, don't open that room." And of course she opens it, because let's be honest, she probably didn't even care about the door until he told her not to touch it. Inside, a whole collection of corpses. But today we're not talking about the fairy tale. We're talking about the real man behind it. A real man with real victims. A national hero, a nobleman, a knight who literally fought shoulder to shoulder with Joan of Arc, and then somehow speedrun his way into becoming one of the darkest, most unhinged figures in human history. So buckle up. This isn't a story about a monster hiding under the bed. It's about a monster who once sat at the king's table. Don't be scared. Tony's here. I'll hold your hand. But you're not gonna like where we're going. Gilles de Rais was rich, not "I have a nice garden" rich. I mean, my mattress is stuffed with gold and several generations of untreated trauma rich. Born into French nobility, educated, polished, knighted, basically the medieval equivalent of a trust fund gigachad with horses, plate armor, and the unshakable confidence that only comes from never facing consequences. Ever. And then he meets Joan of Arc. Yes, the Joan of Arc. The teenage farm girl who walked into French politics like, "God told me to go clap England." And France, emotionally exhausted, financially bankrupt, and spiritually running on fumes, just went, "All right, someone give her a sword." Gilles sees Joan and thinks, who is this tiny holy paladin, and how is she outperforming our entire military budget with zero training? But none of that mattered, because together, they were unstoppable. Joan, God demands victory. Gilles, say less, proceeds to delete 5 Englishmen from existence with one swing. At the Siege of Orleans, they become national icons. If merch existed back then, their faces would have been on medieval lunchboxes, church candles, and at least one outrageously overpriced tapestry sold by a man named Pierre who absolutely scams tourists on weekends. Gilles becomes a hero, a legend, adored by the people, respected by the king. France's golden boy, the poster child for see what happens when you invest in a knight instead of another castle renovation. Life couldn't be better. And historically speaking, that's exactly the moment when everything starts going straight to hell. Victory is a beautiful thing, until you realize it comes with no instruction manual. Because once France stopped burning, yelling, and crying, once the English packed up their emotional baggage and went home, Gilles de Rais discovered something horrifying. There is nothing more dangerous than a hero with free time. One day, he's out there deleting English soldiers beside Joan of Arc. The next day, he's standing alone in a castle corridor like, so, what now? Is there a second season, DLC, expansion pack, anything? France naturally offered 3 post-war life paths. Become a priest, go broke, die mysteriously. And Gilles looked at all 3 like, wow, incredible, 0 good options. Meanwhile, Joan, she still had God-given main character energy. She kept fighting, kept pushing, kept marching like she had holy Wi-Fi. Gilles had boredom. The kind of boredom that creeps into a rich man's skull and starts flipping all the wrong switches. He wandered from castle to castle, attending banquets hosted by nobles who looked like they hadn't bathed since the last solar eclipse. He smiled, nodded, waved politely, and internally screamed. And when you remove war from a man built for war, he does not become peaceful. He becomes weird. Gilles tried to act normal, tried to enjoy his new hero life. But the truth was painful. Without Joan next to him, without the battlefield, without that constant divine momentum, he felt like a very expensive paperweight. He threw extravagant feasts, hosted ridiculous ceremonies, tried to stay relevant like, please clap, I'm still important. But underneath all the gold, fame, and fancy dinner plates, the cracks were spreading. France's politics didn't help. The same nobles who adored Joan started whispering like jealous high schoolers. She's too popular, too influential. She's making us look useless. Exactly, that's the problem. France loves miracles, right up until miracles start threatening job security. Joan didn't notice the knives being sharpened, but Gilles did. He felt it. He saw it. He watched the court slowly turn on the girl who saved them. But he couldn't do anything. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a strategist. He was a blunt instrument designed to hit England. And while Joan marched toward her destiny, Gilles drifted into his personal void. Too much money, too much silence, too much identity crisis, not enough supervision. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that a bored nobleman with trauma is basically a walking villain origin story. And those little cracks in Gilles' mind, they weren't cracks anymore. They were fault lines. Joan of Arc was unstoppable, right up until France decided it was tired of being grateful. While she charged ahead, fearless, blazing, carrying a nation's wounded pride, the political gremlins in the French court started doing what they do best, stabbing people in the back without the honesty of doing it to their face. Then came Compiègne. Joan rode out to defend the city, and France closed the gate behind her. Not, oops, a mistake, closed. Not bad timing, closed. No, this was intentional, calculated, a betrayal polished to a professional shine. Burgundians, England's petty overcaffeinated cousins, captured her, dragged her off, sold her to the English for money and political favors. And when Gilles heard, he didn't break anything. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten God or the nearest wall. He just stopped. Because Joan wasn't just a comrade. She wasn't just a symbol. She was the anchor in a life built on chaos, violence, and gold-plated emptiness. Without her, France felt hollow. Purpose felt hollow. Even God felt silent, like he'd quietly stepped out of the room. And for the first time in years, Gilles felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Because if France could betray Joan, heaven's chosen girl, what chance did any mortal man have? Meanwhile, France sat on its hands while Joan faced an English trial run by men defined by bitterness, insecurity, and the emotional depth of boiled cabbage. They accused her of everything: witchcraft, cross-dressing, speaking to God without authorization. Gilles wasn't there, but when the reports reached him, something inside him broke. His moral compass snapped like cheap metal. His purpose dissolved. His faith hit the ground from a rooftop. Because on May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc was burned alive at 19. And somewhere far from the fire, in a castle stuffed with gold, servants, and that familiar, suffocating silence, Gilles felt the flames anyway, not as hope, not as faith, as a void that demanded to be filled with something, anything. And he chose the worst anything human history has ever recorded. Joan's death didn't create the monster. It simply removed the last fragile barrier keeping the monster locked inside. When a man loses his faith, he looks for answers. But when Gilles de Rais lost his faith, he went looking for new management. And unfortunately, the only people offering spiritual guidance at that time were men who looked like they hadn't slept since the last plague. Enter the Alchemists, the occultists, the wannabe demonologists. Basically the medieval equivalent of, bro, trust me, I know a guy. These were the types who promised Gilles that they could talk to spirits, summon wealth, unlock cosmic secrets, and maybe even bring back God's attention. All they needed was candles, strange powders, suspiciously large books, and the moral flexibility of a wet noodle. Gilles, lonely, shattered, spiritually drunk, said, "Sure, let's see what happens." And so began the descent. The rituals started small: incense, chanting, symbols on parchment, weird late-night meetings in cold castle rooms where everybody talked like they were auditioning for the role of mysterious villain number 3. But soon, small rituals weren't enough. Gilles wanted answers. He wanted signs. He wanted power. Anything to fill the void Joan's death left behind. The occultists, of course, were thrilled. Because nothing motivates a con artist quite like a rich, traumatized nobleman ready to try anything except therapy. They told Gilles that to summon a demon named Baron, he needed an offering. Not gold, not jewels. Something pure, something innocent, something that would get the demon's attention. And that was the moment. The exact moment when the final line snapped inside him. The part of him that once protected France, that once followed Joan into battle, that once believed in God, collapsed completely. He stepped into the darkness willingly, almost gratefully, and what came next would stain history forever. This was no longer a hero losing his way. This was a hero walking into the abyss with open arms. Because when you show demons the door, they don't knock. They smash it off the hinges and occupy whatever's left of you. Historians love to say, Gilles de Rais descended into darkness. Cute line. Very poetic. But let's be honest, a poetic line doesn't explain anything, because darkness didn't whisper to Gilles. It didn't tempt him. It didn't lure him with promises. No, he walked straight into it, like a man entering a store that sells nothing but awful life decisions. And the staff working in that store? Alchemists, sorcerers, medieval experts with the confidence of geniuses and the scientific accuracy of a damp potato. These guys strolled into Gilles' castle with the swagger of men who absolutely did not deserve that swagger. One day they said, "My lord, yeah, we can summon a higher demon. We just need ingredients." Ingredients. No details, no explanation, just ingredients. In medieval Europe, when someone asks for ingredients without specifying what they are, that's your cue to panic. Because these men couldn't light a candle without blaming failure on mystical energies. And yet, Gilles believed them. Ever since Joan died, God had gone silent. France was a bureaucratic dumpster fire, and Gilles was left with a giant empty castle, a giant empty purpose, and way too much money. A very dangerous combination. Let's switch to documentary mode. Medieval Europe had no child protection whatsoever. No police, no missing persons reports, no investigation system, no record keeping, no real government. A missing child back then was basically, well, that happens. Children were incredibly easy to lose. Because slave markets existed, yes. Medieval Europe literally trafficked children and nobody asked questions. Families were painfully poor. When a noble said, "I need a servant," many parents heard, "One less mouth to feed." Dark, but true. Gilles' castle was basically medieval Disneyland. Think about a poor medieval kid. Their entire life is mud, hunger, and boredom. Then suddenly, toys, food, jugglers, performers, colorful rooms. A rich lord wants to see you. In the medieval world, that was the equivalent of free Wi-Fi plus free pizza plus free iPad. Gilles' servants lured children with candy, toys, food. The Lord wants to meet you. Some children were bought, some were collected, some were enticed with promises of fun. This was not a one-man operation. It was a full system. Why didn't anyone notice? Here's where medieval stupidity shines at full brightness. No one had the power to question a noble. Gilles was a war hero, a millionaire, protected by the king, living in a fortress, surrounded by loyal servants and villagers. They were terrified of the nobility. Accusing a lord equals signing your own death sentence. Also, children went missing constantly because medieval Europe was basically Dark Souls, the real-life edition. Disease, wolves, crime, famine. Kids disappeared all the time. So nobody thought, wait, why so many? They just assumed the world ate them like usual. Even today, historians aren't fully sure. Was Gilles truly a monster, or did politics create one? Some theories argue confessions were extracted under torture. The church wanted his fortune. Local officials wanted him gone. Witnesses lied. Numbers were exaggerated. The Bluebeard fairy tale distorted the story. Occult accusations were part of the era's witch hunt mentality, which means maybe he was guilty. A brilliant hero who unraveled into darkness. But maybe he was framed, a convenient scapegoat for a messy kingdom needing someone to blame. Both versions are terrifying. Because in a kingdom where truth decays faster than bodies, Gilles de Rais became whatever the storytellers needed. A warning, a weapon, a legend, a perfectly packaged monster for a society trying to hide its own sins. By the time whispers about missing children reached the authorities, France had already decided what it wanted: a villain. Quick, convenient, and preferably rich. Enter Gilles de Rais, the perfect target. A wealthy noble? Check. A flamboyant personality? Check. A complicated past? Check. Friends in high places, but not high enough? Double check. And the best part? France was in a mood. A let's blame someone for everything mood. A don't fix the system, just find a scapegoat mood. Basically, a medieval Tuesday. The church and local officials launched what they proudly called an inquiry, which in 15th century France meant start with a conclusion, then go hunting for evidence. And if evidence doesn't exist, just manufacture some witnesses appeared out of nowhere. People who never met Gilles were suddenly experts on his sins. Others changed their stories depending on who was taking notes. And remember, torture wasn't a last resort. It was step one. The medieval equivalent of, can you confirm you're guilty? No? Okay, let me motivate you. So, confessions poured in, but were they reliable? Imagine confessing to anything while hanging upside down in a smoky dungeon with a bald monk yelling Latin at you. You'd admit to stealing the moon. The trial was less legal proceeding and more dark comedy theater. Prosecutors read accusations like they were casting spells. Witchcraft, heresy, demon summoning, child murder, ritual magic, questionable fashion choices, probably tax evasion too. Who knows? Every crime from the era got thrown at him like they were trying to complete a medieval bingo card. The judges? Half were church officials who believed demons lived under their beds, and the other half were nobles who smelled money in Gilles' estate like sharks smell blood. Neutrality level, somewhere between 0 and negative infinity. Most of the evidence was hearsay, rumor, third-hand gossip. A friend of a cousin of a servant said, forced confessions, witnesses who contradicted themselves, and weirdly theatrical testimonies. Seriously, some sounded like bad fan fiction. Even the numbers didn't add up. Some said dozens of victims. Some said hundreds. Some said thousands. Thousands? Which is adorable because the region didn't even have enough people to make that number possible. It's like someone said, hey, let's exaggerate until God gets confused. Even today, historians look at the records and go, this math does not math. So why did it happen? Simple. It was politically useful. The church needed a big win. Local officials wanted his land. His enemies wanted him gone. His occult experiments made him look suspicious. And France desperately needed a monster to distract everyone from how badly the kingdom was functioning. And voila, instant demon. Just add rumor. The verdict, decided before the trial began. Unsurprisingly, Gilles was found guilty. Shock of the century, right? The church seized his property. The officials took their shares. Everyone congratulated each other for upholding justice. And the people? They loved it. Because every society loves the same three things: a hero to worship, a villain to destroy, and a story simple enough to avoid thinking too hard. The deeper you dig, the stranger the truth gets. If he was guilty, he was one of history's darkest figures. If he was innocent, he was one of its greatest victims. And the truth is buried somewhere between propaganda, torture, politics, and a kingdom desperate for a clean narrative. In medieval France, justice didn't find the truth. It sculpted one. And once they finished sculpting Gilles de Rais, they called the statue a monster and burned the man beneath it. When execution day arrived, France suddenly remembered how much it loved public drama. Executions weren't just punishments. They were the medieval version of Netflix premieres. Vendors sold food, children got front row seats, priests rehearsed their speeches, and the local nobles showed up like they were attending Fashion Week. Somber outfits, serious faces, zero sincerity. In the center of it all, Gilles de Rais. The man who once fought beside Joan of Arc now walked to the gallows with the same calm dignity the court had spent months trying to strip from him. And here's the weird part. He apologized. He forgave everyone. He showed more grace than the entire courtroom combined. Witnesses wrote that his final confession was so moving, so composed that the crowd actually cried. Imagine that. A whole crowd mourning a man the court had just turned into a demon. Medieval inconsistency at its finest. His body was hanged, cut down, and then burned. Because nothing says justice like doing things twice. Let me point out something the church hoped you wouldn't notice. Some historians note something strange. Gilles received a Christian burial blessing before he was burned. That shouldn't happen if the church truly believed he was a heretic, a witch, a demon worshiper. But they did it anyway, because symbolism matters when your entire trial is made of symbolism. People didn't cheer, they didn't celebrate, they wept, openly. Many described him not as a monster, but as a fallen hero. Some even compared his execution to Joan of Arc's, which is kind of embarrassing for the French government if you think about it. First you burn your miracle girl, then you burn your war hero. At some point you have to ask, are we fighting England, or are we just fighting competence? After Gilles died, something fascinating happened. Witnesses retracted statements. Officials went quiet. Documents vanished. Testimonies contradicted each other even more. It's almost as if the story worked only while the man was alive. Dead men don't defend themselves. Dead men don't appeal. Dead men don't embarrass the church. Convenient, isn't it? A few decades later, France created something new. The fairy tale of Bluebeard. The story of a wealthy nobleman with a mysterious locked room full of corpses. A story about suspicion, wealth, rumor, death. And a man society decided was a monster. Sound familiar? Bluebeard wasn't written as a biography. It was written as a detergent, a way to wash away political guilt and turn a messy historical scandal into a neat moral lesson. Don't trust rich men. Don't open forbidden doors. Don't marry strangers. Cute. But the truth is darker. The story was never about a murderer. It was about a society desperate to justify the execution of someone it didn't fully understand. Joan was burned as a witch. Gilles was burned as a monster. Both fought for France. Both were betrayed by France. Both became legends for reasons they never asked for. History loves clean endings. Heroes on pedestals. Villains in flames. Morals wrapped in ribbons. But real life? Real life is messy, contradictory, uncomfortable. And stories like Gilles de Rais don't end with a lesson. They end with a question. Because whether he was a monster or a man the system decided to sacrifice, the outcome was the same. France killed another one of its own. First Joan, then Gilles. Two people who fought for a country that repaid them with fire. And centuries later, France rewrote both endings. Joan became a saint. Gilles became a fairy tale villain. The girl on fire became holy. The knight beside her became a nightmare. That's the thing about history. When you don't like the truth, you don't fix it. You retell it. Bluebeard wasn't born from a corpse-filled room. It was born from guilt, from fear, from a kingdom trying desperately to make sense of a man it couldn't categorize. A scapegoat becomes a monster. A tragedy becomes a warning. A man becomes a myth. But if you push aside the legends, the politics, the witness tampering, the torture, the church theatrics, the noble greed, you're left with a darker truth. Sometimes the real monster is the story itself. Because stories outlive the people they devour. They shape reputations. They bury facts. They twist memory. And once a lie is repeated long enough, it stops sounding like a lie. It sounds like history.